All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to my channel. We are about an hour, actually about 50 minutes away from kickoff of the Cincinnati Bengals and the Kansas City Chiefs. And I wanted to get one more video in here to get my final thoughts on the game here in the next 20, 30 minutes before kickoff. So, I did a quick preview earlier in the week, and then we did the Madden simulations. And I went on a couple rants in those Madden simulations about, how the Bengals got here. And I want to be very clear that Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals are a very talented football team. Um, there's a lot of talk by a lot of, I call them media blowhards, um, like people like Skip Bayless, okay? And I'll even put Nick Wright, who's a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I'll put him in the same category too. These guys' sole purpose is to get clicks and to get views and to get likes and to get people mad as well and get them talking about what they're talking about. So half the time I don't believe what anything that these people, I don't think that they actually believe what they're saying half the time. I think they're given a script and they're told to argue a point, have fake arguments. Now I do know Nick is a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he used to be here in Kansas City. He was based here in Kansas City when he was on the radio here on 610 Sports. So I mean, his Kansas City Chiefs fandom is legitimate. I do think he goes over the top sometimes, but that's for show, And Skip Bayless does the same thing. And then there was this guy, I can't remember the guy's even, I can't remember his name, but I saw it this morning. Somebody tweeted out that who has the advantage. It was a guy on NFL Network. He's one of their um, he was one of their analysts for fantasy football, and he says, well, the advantage is obvious. It's obviously Joe Burrow, and that's an asinine take. Okay, Patrick Mahomes is better than Joe Burrow. That doesn't mean it's, but this isn't, these aren't mutually exclusive ideas. We can say Patrick Mahomes is better than Joe Burrow while still saying Joe Burrow is a great quarterback. Because we say Patrick Mahomes is better doesn't mean we're saying Joe Burrow sucks. And that's where this whole, this duopoly of ideas that if we don't say somebody is great, that must mean we say they are terrible. And that's social media. That's the modern internet age for you. That's hot take central. So anyway, I do think the Bengals, obviously, who beat the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 17. I've talked about that matchup. I've talked about what I thought about that game. Um, when we really want to break it down here in the playoffs, though, why are the Bengals 7-point underdogs? At one point, 7.5-point underdogs. Why? What does Vegas know that nobody else knows? Well, first of all, they know what Patrick Mahomes does in the playoffs, okay? 25 touchdowns and 5 interceptions are his career playoff statistics. And 4 of those 5 interceptions came in the 2 Super Bowl games. He threw 2 against the Bucs and 2 against the 49ers. Obviously beating the 49ers, but losing to the Buccaneers last year. When you take out the Super Bowl numbers, okay, and you focus on the 8 games that he has played at Arrowhead Stadium, which he's played 10 playoff games, 2 have been in the Super Bowl, the other 8 have all come at Arrowhead. He's never played a road playoff game other than the Super Bowl. Those 8 playoff games at Arrowhead, he's 7-1. His one loss was to Tom Brady, and honestly, that loss should have been a win. It should have been a win. I'm not going to talk about the overtime. The Chiefs lost in overtime because they didn't get the ball. Who cares? Patriots played by the rules, and they beat the Chiefs fairly. The Chiefs should have won, though, because if they just would have had D Ford, if D Ford just would not have made a mental mistake on the game-winning interception, the game would have been over, and regulation never would have gone to overtime. I mean, and the Patriots were out of timeouts. They couldn't stop the clock. The Chiefs could have kneeled 3 times, and the game would have been over. It was inside 2 minutes. And but he was offsides, and they had to, so the interception didn't count. And we know what happened. They went down and took the lead. Of course, the Chiefs came back and tied the game at with 11 seconds left to send it to overtime. But so that's the only playoff loss he's had at home, and he was really good in that game. 3 touchdowns, no picks. His passer rating is 126 at home in these 8 playoff games. And of course, that loss to the Patriots in 2018 was the only loss. So 4 years ago, or actually 3 years ago, because it was early 2019, that's the only loss he's had at home in the playoffs. He beat the Colts the week before that, the Chiefs' first playoff win in since they beat the Houston Texans in 2015. And then the next year, obviously the Super Bowl winning year, he has just the ungodly performance against the Houston Texans. Of course, it took a little while to get going. The Chiefs were down big early, but then Mahomes throws 4 touchdown passes in the second quarter. How does that happen? That's what he does. Boom, 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 boom. And then they had the lead at halftime. And he threw 5 or 6 touchdowns in that game as the Chiefs put a 50-burger on the Texans. And in the AFC Championship game, in my opinion, he played one of his best games ever against a scrappy Tennessee team that year. Of course, they were the 6th seed. And had what I still think is one of the best plays that a quarterback can make in playoff history. His touchdown run of like 26 yards right before the end of the half that put the Chiefs on top, and they never relinquished the lead after that. He was not going to let the Chiefs lose that game. And then I said in the video that the Chiefs won by 17. They actually won by 11. They were up 18, and Tennessee got a touchdown with like 3 minutes to go to make it 11, to make it look a little closer than it really was. Because it was 35-17, and Tennessee got a touchdown to make it 35-24. So, and then we've seen what he did last year. He was really, really good against the Browns until he got hurt. And then the Chiefs had to hang on for dear life with Chad Henne. He played maybe his 3rd best playoff game ever against the Bills last year and just routing the Bills 38-24. Again, another game that wasn't as close as the score indicated. You're like, wow, 14 points that's not a close game anyway. You're right. The Chiefs were 3 touchdowns better than the Bills last year. And then we've saw what he's done this year. He's playing his best football right now of his career in the playoffs right now. Shredded a decent defense in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, they don't have an offense. We know that. But he shredded their defense, okay? You know, the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger doesn't play cornerback or defensive end. No, they have the defensive player of the year on their roster, who, you know, made some plays in that game, okay? Don't get me wrong. Tipped a pass. He scored a touchdown. And I mean, Pittsburgh's defense is decent. I'm not going to say it's the best, but it's decent. And they torched them for 42 points in the playoffs after, you know, torching them for 36 points just a couple weeks prior to that. And then we saw what happened in the Bills game. The Chiefs kind of moved the ball up and down the field with relative ease. They only had to punt the ball twice. And then we saw the heroics at the end of the game and in overtime by Mahomes and the Chiefs offense. You know, I'm not a big numbers guy in terms of like breaking things down, in terms of like, you know, talking about all these different numbers like that Pro Football Focus talks about. Okay, I'm more of a watch and feel kind of guy. You know, Rich Eisen. If you ever watch Rich Eisen on YouTube or watch his show on the Peacock Network and then catch the clips of it on YouTube, I'm a lot like what Rich Eisen does. You know, I can talk the numbers, and I will talk numbers, but a lot of it is the eye test and kind of the old-fashioned scouting approach. You know, like to baseball. You know, you got the analytics approach to baseball, and then you have the scouting approach to baseball. And I think there's room for both. You know, so here in football, I think there's room for both. There's the analytical approach to football, and then there's the scouting approach to football. I think there's definitely room for both. Sometimes the numbers don't tell you the whole story, but sometimes the numbers do tell you the story, and sometimes there are other aspects of the game that do tell you the story, or at least write a certain chapter about that story. You know, there are so many people that like to talk about how officiating, fans shouldn't complain about officiating, when at the end of the day, officiating is a component of each NFL game. You can't ignore it. It is a component. Absolutely it is. And I'll make this as quick as possible. Officiating was a component in the Bengals win in Week 17. I'm not going to say it was the reason the Chiefs lost. I'm not going to say that, okay? That would be discrediting to the amazing game that Burrow and Jamar Chase played. But it would you would be denying reality if you also said that officiating had no part in the amazing game that those two played. It absolutely had a part. The Chiefs refusing to double team Jamar Chase on 3rd and 27 or 3rd and 30, whatever it was. I mean, that played a tremendous part too, okay? The Chiefs, the bigger thing is the Chiefs only had the ball 3 times in the second half in that game. They had a scoring drive that honestly should have been a touchdown if Tyreek Hill runs the proper route on 3rd down. And Mahomes sees him. It was a mistake by both players. And it was an incomplete pass, and then they had to kick a field goal. That was not ideal. And when you look at the final drive that the Bengals had, I don't think you're going to see the similar type of results in this game. That was a backup officiating crew that was called in last minute. Wasn't even an entire crew. It was replacement officials who were put together because of COVID issues. And it was an official who throws an average amount of his normal crew throws an average amount of flags. But it's hard to put that all on them because he wasn't even dealing with his normal crew. Now, ironically enough, this is the same official, head referee, who's going to be the head referee in 2 weeks in the Super Bowl. So who do we have for the head referee for this game? Well, it's none other than Bill Vinovich, who is not just my opinion. He is typically rated by everybody as the best referee in the NFL. His crew is the best. Why are they the best? Because they call the fewest amount of penalties. Now, you could say, well, they shouldn't just overlook things. Absolutely. You shouldn't overlook things. If there's legitimate pass interference, call it. If there's a legitimate hold, call it. If there's a legitimate roughing the passer, call it. Absolutely, call it. But what his crew does, and what I really admire about his crew, as well as the crew last week, who in the Chiefs and Bills game, I don't know this for a fact. This is my opinion. This is from just observing. But they seem to take the approach in games that unless one side or the other has a clear advantage on a play where you could call a penalty, they're not going to call one. For example, an offensive lineman's job is to block the defensive lineman from getting to the quarterback. Okay, I'm oversimplifying this, all right? I know there's, if they're running, they have to create lanes and they have to pull here. Yeah, I get it, okay? Look, I'm trying to explain this like a 5th grader would understand, okay? His job is to block, okay? So if he's pass blocking, he's got his arms inside the shoulders, inside the shoulder pads, and he's blocking. A lot of times he's grabbing a hold of the jersey. He's grabbing a hold of something. He's got a hold of it, okay? Do they call a holding on that? No, they don't. Could they? Well, technically, yes. Technically, you are holding the jersey. But do they call it? They don't. Because why? It doesn't give the offensive lineman any fair advantage over the defensive lineman. Now, as soon as the defensive lineman moves and he gets out the side and the offensive lineman now tries to wrap, gets his arms outside the shoulders, then that's when they call a penalty. When they start reaching and grabbing. I said the same thing when I used to coach youth basketball for my son for several years. These kids, the concept of playing defense on basketball is very similar to how you play offensive line. You play offensive line, you play defense in basketball with your feet, not with your hands. Your hands are a big component of it, don't get me wrong, but you play by positioning. It's all about positioning. And if you have proper position, they're not going to call a hold on you, even if you are technically holding their jersey. That goes for both ways. It can be said that, so the one thing that I do admire about the Bill Vinovich crew is from what I've seen, from games that I've watched, that he's the head referee, not typically only watching Chiefs games. He has an approach where I tend to see that. unless it's completely obvious. So let's go back to the Super Bowl 2 years ago against the Chiefs and 49ers. There was a play towards the end of the first half where George Kittle was called for an offensive pass interference against Daniel Sorensen. And on that play, he armbars Sorensen, and then he reaches out and does it again. Now, in my opinion, if he only does it one time, he probably is not going to get called for a penalty. But the second one gave him a clear advantage over the defender to where they had to call a penalty. They had to throw the flag there. And, there was a lot of 49er fans who were, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Well, first of all, if a wide receiver does that, he may not get called with it, even if he does it twice. Wide receivers a lot of times seem to get the benefit of the doubt. Tight ends never get the benefit of the doubt if they do something like that. I've seen it with Travis Kelce. I saw it for years with Tony Gonzalez. And trust me, here in Kansas City, we understand, we know what good tight ends are, so we're hyper focused on the tight end. And I've seen tons and tons and tons of offensive pass interferences called on the players that I cheer for. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that that officiating in that first Bengals and Chiefs game was a component, and it wasn't the reason the Chiefs lost. And I think that with the amount of analysis that's being done on this matchup, and people saying, well, they beat them one time, they can beat them again. Well, that's overly simplistic. How did they beat them? They beat them by a field goal as time expired, we'll say with some questionable calls, okay? But even if they weren't questionable, they were 50-50 calls, a lot that went the Bengals' way. A lot of the passes to Jamar Chase, he was defended by Fenton. Fenton played really good defense on Chase. I mean, you can go back and watch it. I've gone back and watched it. Fenton played really good defense. There was one pass where it hit Chase, and then it hit Fenton's arm and rolled over the top of it, and then right back, and then bounced back off and back into the arms of Chase while he was trying to get 2 feet down on the sideline. I mean, that pass is completed maybe 2% of the time. It's picked off maybe 10% of the time. And the other 88% of the time, it's an incompletion. I mean, it was an incredibly low percentage catch, but he still made the catch because he's a great, great wide receiver. But even the greatest wide receivers don't make all the catches, and he made all of the 50-50 catches in that game. And I say 50-50, they weren't 50-50. They were more like 25-75. A lot of them were very low percentage chances to be caught, and he caught all of them. Yeah, he's talented. So maybe you bump his percentages up a few points. But even then, every 50-50 ball went their way in that game. And they had to have a historic performance by Jamar Chase, a historic performance by Joe Burrow, to beat the Chiefs by 3 at home as time expired. What about that game makes you think that they're going to win in Kansas City? Because that's all the evidence we have is that game. Now, the other evidence we have is how they're playing here in the playoffs. Now, the Bengals hadn't won a playoff game since 1991. So the 1990 season so January of 91, it's been 31 years since they won a playoff game. And they squeaked by the Raiders. We talked about that game. I'm not going to rehash all the questionable things that happened in that game. With the whistle blowing on the touchdown, shouldn't have counted. Again, I've talked about it. It's over and done with. The Bengals won. But they had to withstand a goal line stand there at the end of the game, and in the end of the game, just to win. Then they go to Tennessee to play a farce of a number 1 team in the Tennessee Titans, who were a 12-5 team that were, well, actually they're like a 9-8 team masquerading as a 12-5 team. They were just, and their stubborn head coach is the reason. Their stubborn head coach and their quarterback is the reason why they lost that game. Yeah, Joe Burrow threw for 348 yards, no touchdowns, threw an interception. Now, granted, the interception was an amazing play by the defender. I get it, but still, it was still an interception. Tennessee still wins that game, even with the horrible, horrible decisions that Vrabel made, and even with the horrible game that Tannehill played. They still win that game if they just complete that pass there instead of at the end of the game to get, because that would have put them in field goal range. That's all they needed to do. Matter of fact, I think they were already in field goal range. I know they were close. So it was a disastrous day for the Titans, and the Bengals kicked a field goal to win the game 19-16. Look, the Bengals have won 2 games, and everyone thinks now they're suddenly this amazing franchise. They're this amazing new juggernaut. I mean, look here on the screen. You can see right here, plain as day. Cincinnati Bengals 10-7 in the regular season. Yeah, Chiefs are 12-5. I get it. They're 2 games better, but still they lost 5 games. But 10-7, really? With some really interesting losses. That's one thing about the Chiefs. The Chiefs never didn't have a bad loss all season long. Chiefs lost to 5 really good football teams. Yeah, and I'll put the Tennessee Titans as a really good football team. I just don't think they were the best team in the AFC. So, the Cincinnati Bengals coming into Arrowhead today. Game's now starting in 30 minutes. We're now at 1:30 here Central Time. How do I see this game going? Chiefs have scored 84 points in 2 games. The Bengals have scored, 48? Is that right? What is it? 26 plus 19, 45 points. They've scored 45 points. So the Chiefs have almost doubled their point output. The Chiefs also put up 42 points on the number 1 defense and points scored and yardage allowed in the NFL. And don't try to twist the numbers to make them say something that they're not. Those are legitimate numbers, because we had to hear them all week that the Chiefs weren't going to do this to the Buffalo Bills because of the number 1 defense, and they went out there and did it anyway. Over 500 yards of total offense. Burrow holds the ball way too long. He disrespected the Kansas City crowd. He's the one who started this whole "why not us" thing, and now he's walking it back, saying, that we're tired of being labeled as the underdog. Dude, you're the one who started this whole thing. And people calling him Joe Cool and trying to compare him to Joe Montana and stuff, and the guy needs to learn to shut his mouth. Is the bottom line. He needs to learn to shut his mouth and let his play on the field do the talking. That's what Patrick Mahomes does. Look, and if you're pissed off at Patrick Mahomes because of social media, things that his brother does, that has nothing to do with Patrick Mahomes' play on the field, because Patrick Mahomes doesn't say anything off the field. He does everything the right way. He would never comment about the opposing crowd and the crowd volume. If the situation was reversed and Patrick Mahomes was the Bengals quarterback, but everything else was, and everything else was the same, Patrick Mahomes would not say, yeah, I've played at louder stadiums in college than Arrowhead Stadium. Doesn't even compare. And yeah, I know the SEC loves their football. The school that I went to for college is now in the SEC. And I've been to 2 SEC championship games, and it's loud. Don't get me wrong, it's loud. It is nothing compared to Arrowhead when the Chiefs are in the playoffs. Doesn't even compare. And as loud as Arrowhead is, Joe Burrow is going to be in for a even more rude awakening, because Kansas Cityans are born with a chip on their shoulder, okay? I've lived here my entire life, and I admit it, that we have a chip on our shoulders. Because everybody always talks about how much better St. Louis is than us, and St. Louis they like to hold it over us as well. We're in flyover country. We want people to love us, okay? When we had the All-Star game here in 2012, the Major League Baseball All-Star game, it was so important for us to have all these national people come in here and talk about how good our city was. Talk about our barbecue. Talk about, the plaza. Talk about the Power and Light District. Talk about how the stadium looks really nice, and how the Royals have an young up and coming team, and and George Brett was out there, He was the spokesperson the whole time, and they did a great job. And so when people like, I think it was Brandon Phillips' wife went off about just how disgusting the weather is here in the summertime, and I'm like, dude, your husband plays in Cincinnati, which ironic, so Cincinnati, but it's like your husband plays for the Cincinnati Reds in Cincinnati. You think it doesn't get hot and humid in Cincinnati in the summertime? It's just as disgusting there as it is here. But it's just, it's flyover country. We want people to like us. And when people don't like us, we get pissed off because we have an inferiority complex about everybody else. And when people don't like us, we put it as a badge of honor, and we go out there and we make them pay for it. Okay, another baseball term here. Look back at the 2015 All-Star voting, okay? Well, there was no mass conspiracy. There was no hacking of the voting system. No, it was just Royals fans getting out there and registering, just voting like crazy. And it was 25 votes or 35 votes per email address. So I had tons of friends who had like 10 to 15 email addresses and then they got even more free email addresses from different sites. And they were voting with all of them. Now, is that wrong? It doesn't say anything in the rules against it. It just says, you can't, it's 25, I think it was, like I said, it was 25 votes per email address. So it was within the rules. It doesn't say 25 votes per person. It says per email address. They wanted people to know that they wanted the Royals represented. We have a chip on our shoulders, okay? So when national people come talk about the Chiefs in a negative way, we're going to let them know. And then when Joe Burrow comes out here and says, hey, your stadium isn't that loud. It's not as loud as SEC stadiums, and it's not that big of a deal. I've played in front of bigger crowds. He's going to be in for a rude awakening here in about 24 minutes of just how loud Arrowhead can be, especially when the Arrowhead crowd feels slighted. And you don't think Patrick Mahomes has a little bit of Michael Jordan in him? That kind of doubt fuels him. Remember back to the game in 2019 against or 2018, I can't remember what year it was, but it was against the Chicago Bears, and it was, I don't know, I think it was in Chicago. Maybe it was at home, but I can't remember exactly. Mahomes just played an incredible game. It was against Mitch Trubisky. And, of course, we all know the Bears took Mitch Trubisky as the first quarterback in that draft ahead of Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes used that as fuel. Now, granted, he's in the right place for him. But any guy who's that competitive, of course he wants to be number one. He wants to be the first quarterback taken in the draft. But he wasn't, and he used that as fuel to go out there and shred the Chicago Bears. To absolutely shred them. He's like, you want to not pick me? I'll show you. In these revenge games, Patrick Mahomes is, like I said, the only one he hasn't got is Tom Brady in the Patriots in 2018. It's the only revenge game that he failed to win, and like I said earlier, that should have been a win if not for Dee Ford lining up off sides. I had a momentary lapse in confidence yesterday when, I don't know, this wave of negativity just kind of came over me, but I was having kind of a bad day, and I thought, man, I think the Bengals might actually pull this off. And then I had to snap myself out of it. I went back and looked at every single thing. And I'm like, Patrick Mahomes is not going to let the Kansas City Chiefs lose this game. Like I said in my video, he is over my dead body. That is the approach he takes. It's over my dead body. Joe Burrow is a talented quarterback who I think is the same age as Mahomes. He's been in the league 3 years less, and he's going to be good. He's going to be really good. But his fatal flaw is that he holds on the ball far too long. And that's going to be a very, very, very big problem in this game coming up here against the Chiefs. So, what do I think how it's going to ultimately go? I see this game going. There's a couple of things that could happen. There is a path for Cincinnati to win, absolutely. If Cincinnati's going to win, it's going to be similar to how they beat the Chiefs back in Week 17. I just can't see it happen because, like I said, a large component of that, not the only component, but a large component of that was the officiating. And I just don't see Bill Vinovich's crew throwing that many flags and having that much of an impact on the game as that one crew did in Week 17. Because Bill Vinovich's crew only throws about 7 penalties per game. That's 7 flags per game, and that's throwing flags. That's not even accepted penalties. They actually only average about 5 accepted penalties per game. They let the guys play, and if the officials stay out of the way and let the Chiefs and the Bengals play, the Chiefs will win this game by 2 or more scores. The only avenue I see of the Bengals getting here is having a game similar to what happened in Week 17. Now, there are other people that are saying things like, well, what if the Chiefs turn the ball over, 4 times? Where's the evidence that Patrick Mahomes is going to turn the ball over 4 times? He has turned the ball over 1 time at home in the playoffs. Once. Oh, well, there was that fumble. No, that was Mecole Hardman. That was Mecole Hardman taking the snap. Wasn't Patrick Mahomes. 1 turnover. 1 turnover he has been responsible for, and I'll only put 50% on him anyway. Still he turned it over, but yeah, it was an amazing play by TJ Watt to deflect the pass. 1 turnover in 4 years at home in playoffs. So I suppose you could hope and pray, and that's really the only thing I think that the Bengal fans have here is hoping and praying for the illogical to happen. The Chiefs should have won that game in Week 17. And if they had, we wouldn't even be having this discussion right now because the playoff situation would have been completely different. Who knows if the Bengals even make the playoffs in that scenario, because then they would be 9-8. And they may not have even made it. Matter of fact, they wouldn't have made it at 9-8. So all this talk about how they're the new dynasty of the AFC, and it took everything going their way from offense to defense to penalties to win a game by 3 points, which ultimately got them into the playoffs. Because they lose that game, they don't even make the playoffs. That's how razor thin the margin is here. And they've played 2 ho-hum games against 2 of the very average, mediocre opponents, and they played 2 ho-hum mediocre games. And probably should have lost to the Titans. The way that they, what they've done here in the playoffs is they've been great from 20-yard line to 20-yard line. They've not been able to punch the ball in the end zone. 2 touchdown drives. So, all right. So how do the Chiefs win this game? So I told you how I think the Bengals have a path, even though I don't think it's a good path. I see this game going several ways for the Chiefs. I do see a possibility of the Bengals maybe jumping out in front and the Chiefs having to come back and win a close game. I could see a game where it goes back and forth, and it comes down to the last possession, where like some people are talking about. I think that's the least likely scenario. Matter of fact, I think that there's a better chance for the same thing to happen in Week 17 than for the Chiefs and Bengals just to trade blows, kind of like the Chiefs and the Colts did back in 2003. I see this game playing out very similar to the way that the AFC Championship has played out the past 2 years. I see the Chiefs getting a 2 to 3 touchdown lead, 2 to 3 scored lead on the Bengals and holding them at arm's length, and then the Bengals coming back and getting a score or 2 to make the game look a lot closer at the end. And the simulations I ran ended up, the Chiefs won 9-10. Average score 38-24, which ironically enough was the score that the Chiefs beat the Bills last year, 38-24, which I predicted exactly. Matter of fact, 38-24. I got that score exactly right. And that's what I'm going to do again this year. I think the Chiefs are 2 touchdowns better when the final whistle blows. I think at one point they will be up 3 scores in this game. I think the Chiefs win 38-24, 41-24. It's going to be somewhere along the lines. The Bengals are going to have to score 40 points to win. And if the Bengals score 40 points, I cannot imagine a scenario where the Chiefs don't score more. suppose it could happen. Like they say, any given Sunday. So, anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. Let's look real quick here. Matchup predictor. It's about 7 to 10. 7 out of 10 in favor of the Chiefs on the ESPN's power index. Of course, the money line's plus 280 on the Bengals, minus 350 on the Chiefs. Chiefs are 7-point favorites right now, which at 7 points, the money is still going to the Chiefs. If they wanted money, if money was there, or what they're saying here is that they're still trying to get money on the Bengals. No one's putting money on the Bengals. They're not. And because if they wanted money to be put on the Chiefs, they'd lower this a half point. They'd lower it to 6.5. So, I mean, there's just no money coming in on the Bengals. Last thing to talk about here. Tyrann Mathieu has been cleared to play. He will play in this game. He cleared concussion protocol. And the only other thing for the Chiefs here, Chiefs inactive players today are Derek Gore, Prince Tega Wanago, the third quarterback, Shane Buechele, who cares, Kalen Saunders, Josh Kenando, and DeAndre Baker. So a bunch of nobodies. And then the Bengals inactives, Trent Irwin, don't know. Stanley Morgan, don't know. Vernon Hargraves III, don't know. Travion Williams, Josh Tupou, Fred Johnson, Cam Sample. I don't know any of these players. I mean, if any of those are legitimate people that are out, like holy cow, we can't believe that they're out. Try to look down here to see if like anybody's saying like some like offensive lineman is going to be out. I don't think so. Doesn't look like it. So, all right, that is pretty much my thoughts on here. So, well, little over 30 minutes on this video. So the game's going to start here in about 15 minutes. Thank you so much for watching. For my final thoughts here, and like I said, I think it's going to go. Chiefs are going to win by 2 touchdowns. If it doesn't happen, hey, it doesn't happen. But Chiefs and Rams, Super Bowl. And then the Chiefs will have to play in their opponent's stadium for the 2nd straight year to win a Super Bowl. But I think this year there's no Tom Brady. There's no Tom Brady this year. Anyway, thanks guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. We'll talk to you later. See you guys.